Somebody had a hand up.
Yes, ma'am. Can you cite any specific studies that go along with what you were just saying? I've been looking for that for a while.
You know what? I cannot, but I know there's a gazillion studies on that, and because they'll come through stuff that I'm reading. But my kids used to go to a Montessori school, and they're like in their 20s now. And even back then, when they were kids, they would send the studies home with us, because part of that Montessori program, they wanted us to really decrease the amount of. So I don't, but I know because they would send them. That was back like 10, 15 years ago. And then I still see it, but I don't have it on top. You can probably Google that. Studies that say TV is bad for you. But I know the studies are there. And it makes sense, right? Our ancestors did not sit around. They didn't Google anything. They didn't type. They didn't drive. They didn't sit behind a computer. How did they pass their day? Hunting and gathering. They used their bodies all day long. And our brains have not evolved that much. So we're not wired for it. But kids need to move. That's how you learn the world. It's by moving and exploring and getting on stuff and trying and getting under things and over things and making messes and pretending that you're doing stuff and using your imaginations. That's the way we're wired. You know, there are actually OTs out there that are having to see kids that are young developmentally who wouldn't probably have been normal, except they weren't put on their bellies, for example, and they were putting those little jumpy things, and the kids were not actually moving around. And they were doing the best. I mean, it's not like they were doing anything wrong, but these kids didn't develop normally as a result of that. I'm not saying there's huge numbers of that, but that's even kids that would normally develop because they're not allowed to move in their environments. So, okay, I'm off on my soapbox. All right. So we're going to talk about, and in your handouts, there are like checklists that you can look at. So if you suspect that one of your kids might have sensory issues, you can kind of do that when you're talking to parents or if there are parents here. And most of the time, just for your information, there are some screeners out there that can be used to determine if somebody possibly has sensory processing issues. But it is usually going to be an occupational therapy evaluation. And most of the time it's outpatient. So I work in an inpatient setting, which is kind of unusual. But most therapy of sensory integration type of therapy is done in an outpatient clinic, okay? And therapy emphasizes fun. It does. If the kids are not having fun, I'm doing something wrong. Why does it have to be fun? Why do you think? Therapy has to be fun.
To engage them. To engage them.
Yes, but you know what? It's beyond that, because fun is the way you learn. That's the way we're wired to learn. You're wired to learn through playing. Even schools that we've designed, it's not really the way we're wired to learn. But fun is part of that. That lets us know that nervous system is trying to regulate itself, because if it's anxious or if it's stressed about something, that I'm overdoing something, or if they're getting bored, that means I'm not giving them enough input. So when it's fun, it's a nervous system that's self-regulating. It's a nervous system that's engaging. Does that make sense? So it isn't just that, but it's more than that. And it's just the right challenge. So you make things for them that's challenging enough that they want to do more of it, but not so challenging that they want to give up because it's too hard. These are kids that have failed and failed again. So you want them to succeed, but it has to be challenging enough. So we call it the just right challenge. And it's child-driven, as in, what does your body feel like doing today? So they plan their activities. I guide it artfully. Oh yeah, and let's add this to that, but you have them because you trust that their nervous system is going to kind of want what it needs to reorganize. And it usually happens that way. The only thing they don't seek out is that they have a weak core and they need to do strengthening things. They're not going to seek that out, but they're going to seek it. If it's a kid that needs to move, they're going to want to move and move and move. If it's a kid that needs more proprioception, they want to do a lot of running and crashing activities, and they're always falling off the swings on purpose because we have like mats so they can crash and stuff like that, and they're going to seek that, and those are the kids that need that. So it's really interesting. So you ask the kid, what does your body feel like doing today? What do you feel like doing today? Because they're usually going to have a sense of that. And it does, I work with a lot of adolescents and I work with adults that can benefit from this kind of therapy. And for a lot of the individuals that I work with, at the end, we provide something called a sensory diet. Or if I was working in an outpatient clinic, I would have a sensory diet going, and what that means is activities throughout the day, using some of those preferences like y'all looked at, like this young man that's going to be leaving that, I talked about that kid that's autistic. I would make sure that he would have a lot of these tactile toys, for example. And I would make sure that they would sit him in the front of the car, because he's probably going to get really nauseous in the back of a car, because he's very sensitive to movement. And so I'm going to have specific things to help that child. Kids that are low arousal, I'll tell our parents that when they wake up in the morning, give them a warhead, or give them a piece of a pickle or something to kind of get them going sometimes. Maybe sometimes they need to move and jump on a trampoline a few times before they do their homework. Or so you provide different things throughout the day to match their nervous system, to keep them kind of more regulated. So that's a sensory diet. And there's a reference in the back called Sensory Smarts. It's this book here, and if you go to the website, there's some websites, they have examples, and I think I even have a sensory diet on your handout, I can't remember, but there's on this book called Raising a Sensory Smart Child, is in your reference, and there's a website, sensorysmarts.com, I believe, has ideas of sensory diets. So that's what therapy looks like. So that's my ball pit, different kinds of swings that I use. They're usually playing something, grabbing something, throwing something, so it's usually some kind of a game. And the therapy is done directly, so like I was doing there, so direct intervention, that I'm working with them in a room that has special equipment. But I also do consultation, so sometimes I'll consult with the family, give them ideas, I'll consult on the units. If I was working outpatient, I do consultation maybe with a school teacher or somebody else that works with the kid, or with the parents, so consultations to kind of have them understand, have some compensatory strategies. And that includes family and staff education. And so I do that, and even though we're outpatient, we're inpatient, when the families do come, like say on the weekends, I happen to work on Saturdays, and I'll meet with them and talk to them about what my findings are, my recommendation. We try to get the families to come by before the kid is discharged, so that we can go over some of the strategies and what we're using, what's helped the child. And then just, a lot of you don't know what this is, but I am being trained in something called somatic experiencing, and that is a body-based intervention for decreasing stress and to work with kids or individuals that have trauma. So it's trauma-based, body-based therapy that's different from sensory integration, but I'm trained in that, and what I'm doing is I'm melding the two. And they dovetail beautifully, because somatic experiencing, as it says, somatic, is about looking at trauma through the body. So you kind of guide the individual to check in with their bodies on a regular basis, and you work through different things, not by talking about what happened to them traumatically, but by kind of going through the body. And I work very closely then, because I'm not a psychotherapist, so I'm not doing psychotherapy with them. I work very closely with their psychotherapists, with their, we have different psychotherapists, usually them are social workers, but we have some LPC therapists, and I work with them as well. That I'm doing this kind of work with them, and sometimes we'll do it together. But it's very interesting if you're interested to check it out. And so this is what we're going to be talking about next, is the strategies. Some of them will overlap, which is good. So that way, some things will help for different kinds of things. So these are strategies of things we can do for the kids that have a lot of behavioral issues, okay? So we're going to start with pressure touch. So when you are ticklish or when you're sensitive, light touch is going to be the most intrusive, least pleasurable kind of touch. Think of a spider on your skin. Think of a snake that you almost touched. That's that light touch, okay? Pressure touch is the opposite. So pressure touch is getting a massage. Who doesn't like that? So when I work with the adults, we talk about pressure touch as well for the adults. And we have things like weighted blankets that we use with them. We have these heavy pillows that when I'm doing a stress reduction and I'm teaching them breath control and breath techniques, I put these heavier pillows on them as a way to relax their bodies even more. So they can kind of feel what that feels like. For a lot of them, it's the first time they've actually felt relaxed. They've never been able to let go, and that little extra pressure. So who doesn't like a massage? Getting in a bathtub, getting in a hot tub, using shower heads. That's for the adults. That's what we talk about. Those chairs at the mall that you sit at that vibrate. For the kids, so some of them, if they're working with an OT, and we're going to pass some of these around. They have these brushes called pressure brushes, the TheraPressure brushes. So anybody ever seen this before? Right, so the OTs will work with that. It has to be an OT work with that, but be aware of that, because if you have kids that are using this, it's an important thing to be aware of. It's a really useful technique. I teach it to the kids that can do it themselves, because it has to be done on a regular basis. And I use it a lot with kids that are cutters. Because it's a way for them to get information to their skin, but it's pressure touch. And it's soothing, but they're still getting that input that they kind of are seeking. And I know they're seeking it for different reasons, but they tend to be sensitive too. And I'm not saying kids that cut have sensory issues. That's not correct. I happen to work with kids that have borderline tendencies and happen to have sensory issues, or sometimes just borderline tendencies, and I'm using a sensory tool to help them, whether they have sensory issues or not. Does that make sense? So this is so you might see this around. And then we also use, like I said, here's the big pillows. That's my son, he's 28. That's how long I've been doing it. But it's an example of, so these are the pillows that I still have those are very heavy. You can just take regular pillows and then put in them, like cut them open and put in like bags of rice or beans or little baggies or sand or something and weigh them down. Because nowadays the bigger pillows are very light. These are old ones that had like batting in them, so they were very heavy. And so sometimes they're on their bed. Like with the adults, they're usually on their backs, so they're doing breathing techniques, and then I put the pillows on them. For the kids, we're making a sandwich. So squeezing them out, what do you want on the sandwich? And you squeeze them down, different things. We do those big therapy balls, and you can roll them over their backs. For the adults as well, I teach them that, so you can roll the balls over somebody. If they're lying on their bellies, you just roll the big balls. For some of the kids, this you have to be really careful, but we do, if they like, they can wrap up in a blanket. Be very careful though, because if a kid's been traumatized and they've been, held down or something, that might not be very useful, so you have to be really, really careful with that. For some of them, it's also about the hugs. So if you have to touch somebody, you want to touch them firmly. For example, the boy that I've been using his example a lot, this big autistic boy who's lovely. He has a one-to-one staff because of his behaviors and because he's such a big kid and the other kids are kind of smaller. So he's got a one-to-one staff working with him. And she, to engage him, is doing all this tickling thing. And I'm like, yeah, but not so much. Not so much tickling. Do more like, because he likes touch, but you have to do the firm touch, not the tickly touch. So firm bear hugs. Sometimes for some of the kids, I'll tell you, just sit here. So in the classrooms or somewhere else, and you have to ask them first, and from behind, you would just, of course not with all your hair like that, but you would just squeeze down firmly on the shoulders. And sometimes that's a calming thing. Sometimes we give them these heart hugs where I'm kind of pushing here and there. So it's just ways to kind of give them that nice pressure touch. It has to be somebody you know well, that it's okay to touch them, that you ask permission that you touch them, but that kind of firm touch, because we're working with kids that we know a lot. Or they'll want a hug, I don't just give them a hug, you give them a nice, big, big hug, and then I let go. So if they want a hug, it's always like I really, really, really like a big bear hug, and then I kind of let it go. So they can get that nice firm touch, okay? And the precautions are, it's touch. Touch can be over-arousing very easily. It can have connotations for kids that have been abused. So you have to be very cautious with that. So that's why one of the simplest things to have on board is a weighted blanket, because they're nice and heavy. Most everybody really likes it. I've had a few kids that don't like it, but mostly adults like it. You just lay it on them. They can put it on themselves, so you're not having to touch, but it's still giving them that nice. And so all of our units have a weighted blanket that kids can use as needed, or the staff use to recommend to them. So that's a really useful thing. Another thing that I don't have on there, but that I brought 2 examples, and most of our kids love this. We call it a cocoon. It's officially called a cuddle swing. Because I work with the older kids, I don't call it a cuddle swing. I call it a cocoon. So it hangs, and it's not really a swing unless you have somebody really young that's very light, and you hang it up really high, and then it can be as a swing. And in that case, you have to know how to hang it. So so when I'm describing this, it would not be used as a swing. It would be used of something you get inside of, like a cocoon, like a little cave, like a womb. Because that's actually what it ends up being, is a little womb. And for a lot of the kids with abuse, they love this. They love this. Because you get inside, it hugs you, it gives you that pressure touch. They're inside. I ask them, do you want it closed? Most of them will want it closed. I put little clothespins. They have something they can play with. I have soft music playing. I'm right there next to them. I'm touching base. I might be working with somebody else. I might have that one. And they get inside. And for the little ones, it's a cocoon. And it's like, okay, so what are you changing? So what color are your wings? And you have to come out slowly, because the wing, you can make it a game. But it's a lovely, easy thing because for a swing, it's not too expensive. It's $125, but it can be expensive. But you can make your own for very cheap. So all this is about 3 to 4 yards of this material, which is like Lycra or, what's the other name? Lycra. It's like that swimsuit material. It's not jersey. It's got to have a little more give than that. No, well, it could be spandex. Anything stretchy, but there's another one. But Lycra is, but it's basically swimsuit material. And I have different ones. I actually have 2 or 3 that are different ones. It's just a carabiner. All I've done is put 2 knots. And they can get inside. It's not as fancy as that one. Maybe it doesn't hug. That one's double walled. But still, for about $30, $40. And the idea is you hang it in the corner of their room. They've had a rough day or they're having a rough time. They can go in there. And that's their little space, their little cocoon, their little cave, whatever. You can have something to play with in there, different things to look at, whatever. And it's I think, very useful. So it's one of the things that I make a note of because then I can recommend to families of something they can have for them at home. They can get into, and a lot of the kids really love this.